everybody knew who Superman was. And now I was basically coming along and saying, well, no, you don't.
I wanted Peter Parker to be every kid, every man, every guy.
We have to remember he's a hero. He's not a nut. If he was a nut, he'd pick up a gun and just start shooting the bad guys.
A hero needs to be in tune with the times. What they stand for is what draws the audience to them. As our idea of heroism changes, so do our heroes.
Heroes will always reflect the values of the culture in which they appear. For this reason, a lot of the Greek heroes don't have the same resonance that they certainly did in their time. And even if superheroes, if you study the sort of evolution of someone like Superman or Batman, you'll see that the values that they exhibit and the values that they put all of their belief in change profoundly. Most obviously, Superman and Batman both used to kill people. They don't do that anymore.
What it was that made them great and made them heroes was that they were concerned with those big existential questions that everybody has, but maybe doesn't try to answer. Who am I? Why am I here? Where am I going? That's when we get a Batman who deals with the nature of good and evil, not just reacting to what society says a bad guy is, but really struggling with evil as a principle, both in others and in himself.
Superman needs no introduction, right? Or does he? The Superman that was first created and published in the 1930s is by no means the Man of Steel we know today. Like virtually every other comic book hero, each generation has their own version of Superman. If he's going to be relevant, gotta stay current.
People will know Superman before they know DC. They can repeat bits and pieces of his lore more simply than they would be able to recall elementary math in some cases, I'm sorry to say. But it's true. You know, people know Superman, they know Lois Lane, they know Krypton, they know the Daily Planet.
When I got to do All-Star, I read basically the entire history of Superman books as much as I could do, everything I had, every collection. Superman started in 1938 as a socialist reformer. He was a working-class hero. He would go out and fight corrupt union bosses, and then along came the war. What happens to Superman? Suddenly he can't be that kind of maverick, so he becomes a soldier. Basically, he's a patriotic character. Post-war, when there's no role and superheroes disappear, Superman survives by becoming a suburban 50s dad. After that period finished with the 60s, where Superman suddenly began to question himself. The 70s, he just didn't know what to do until the movie came out. The 80s, he was a yuppie. In the 90s, he died because I think they'd reached the kind of limit of what do we do with this guy. But there's never a limit because you can always revamp Superman.
When I was first handed the Man of Steel project, when I was first invited to reboot Superman, which was only the most scary thing I've ever been asked to do, I had a great advantage, really, in that there was almost 50 years of material behind me. One of the most important elements about Superman for me was that he was sole survivor of the doomed planet Krypton. So one of the things I did was to pare it down and say, no, there's no cousin, there's no dog, there's no monkey. There's just Superman. That he is the only one of his kind is vital, I think, to the character.
Superman fights a never-ending battle for truth and justice, disguised as a mild-mannered newspaper reporter, Clark Kent.
One of the things I did about Clark was to just say, when was Superman ever stupid enough to tell people he had a secret identity? You know, he never did that. He never said, hey, you know, when I'm not being Superman, I'm being this guy. You could say Batman, sure, because he wears a mask, so he must be somebody else. Green Lantern wears a mask. Superman walks around with his face hanging out. You're not going to think he's wearing a mask in his civilian life. So the moment I had that thought, it did two things. It made Clark more interesting because he didn't have to spend all his time not being Superman. He could be Clark, just a guy. And it made Lois more interesting because she wasn't spending all her time trying to trick Clark into revealing that he was Superman, because that would never occur to her. The reaction when Man of Steel, which is how we relaunched it, was released, was literally split right down the middle. People loved it or they hated it, and there was absolutely no gray. Based on sales, it would seem like the people who loved it outnumbered the people who hated it. But certainly this was a daring thing for DC Comics to do. This was Superman. Everybody knew who Superman was. And now I was basically coming along and saying, well, no, you don't.
Jerry Siegel's first version of Superman appeared in his pulp sci-fi story, Reign of the Superman. The evil, bald version of the character bears less resemblance to the Man of Steel we've come to know than it does to his famous nemesis, Lex Luthor. Most people know Batman as a dark Avenger, but like Superman, he's gone through a few changes in his time. The Batman of the 30s would have a tough time finding an audience in the 21st century.
When you're quite young, you want to be Superman. You want to fly, you want to be impervious, you want to have superpowers. See through girls' clothing. But you get to be a little bit older, you get to be a teenager, and suddenly you realize you're never going to fly. You're never going to have superpowers. And then you want to be smart, and you want to be sleek, and you want to be powerful. All of a sudden you like Batman.
Batman is a regular human who's trained himself to be the greatest detective in the world, and he tracks down people who kill and hurt other people because his parents were killed when he was a kid, and he dedicated his life to doing this, and he's very, very, very good at it.
5 issues into the series, they did that scene which is so familiar to everybody now. Little Bruce Wayne, he's 8, 9, or 10, depending on which version you read, and he sees his parents gunned down in the street. It's every child's nightmare. And then decides to let that tragedy shape his life.
Batman is hurt by the world around him, and that sense of suffering really, really enhances his moral heroics far beyond Superman himself, who seems completely unfazed by the world around him.
Batman's a neat balancing act for me because I find so many people have kind of got lost in this dark Batman aspect. Yet we have to remember he's a hero. He's not a nut. If he was a nut, he'd pick up a gun and just start shooting the bad guys. He'd be the Punisher. He's not the Punisher. His weapon is fear. He chooses to scare the bad guys.
As soon as Robin the Boy Wonder, the first of a legion of Boy Wonders, was introduced, that shaded the characterization so that he was not this loner, this obsessed guy who lurks in the shadows. He was a father figure, maybe an uncle figure, maybe the big brother you always wish you had.
There's a lot of depth there. You can play that for comedy the way that the TV series did in the 60s, where you have a caricature of a person. You can also play that for extreme darkness, which is the way that a lot of cartoonists have played him for the last 20 years or so.
I mean, the character has survived for over 68 years because he has evolved.
According to Batman's co-creator Bill Finger, Bruce Wayne's surname was taken from Revolutionary War General Anthony Wayne. General Wayne came from a wealthy family and was known to have a keen strategic mind and a fiery temper, which may have led to his nickname, Mad Anthony. She started out as a descendant of the Greek gods, quickly became a feminist icon. Many have written for Wonder Woman, some quite successfully and some not so much.
Getting into Wonder Woman's head was a little bit tricky because people as a whole tend to think of her as the feminist icon, and that's like the end of her story.
The guy who created it had kept a very firm hand on the art and the characterization. After him, though, I think sometimes people didn't quite know what to do with her.
As part of the holy trinity of the DC universe, you know, Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman, she's the most inscrutable. Anybody could write a decent Superman story. Anybody could write a passable Batman story because they understand what the character is about. Wonder Woman is kind of hard to put your finger on.
She's extraordinarily complicated, though, because so many people point to her overall empowerment as a woman. But at the same time, it's really, really hard to get past simple things like her outfit and the way she is drawn as this visually appealing sex symbol. Feminism has been extraordinarily divided on that. Gloria Steinem, Trina Robbins have all pointed to how valuable Wonder Woman is as this feminist icon. But conversely, you can read into her a lot of things that are specifically designed to appeal to heterosexual male fantasy. So for me personally, Wonder Woman is a study in contradiction.
About Wonder Woman, I have to say, mea culpa, mea maxima culpa. I took away all of her powers and made her a martial artist. Gloria Steinem pointed out that here is the one strong woman in all of comics, and I take away her powers. It seemed right at the time. In retrospect, it seems dunderheaded, especially since I gave her a male mentor. And then if I wasn't done sinning, I called the male mentor an old Chinese guy, I Ching, thereby disrespecting one of the great classics of the Chinese culture. Really batting 1,000 that season.
Wonder Woman has been portrayed as an ambassador of peace as well as a fierce warrior, and a lot of people will ask me questions about that. Well, how can you be both? I just simply don't see why you can't be. If you believe in something really strongly like a peaceful world, and you have some big villain that's coming to threaten everyone's livelihood and life and peace and everything, it really leaves you with no choice. And if you are the fiercest warrior on the planet or the best general or tactician or whatever, wouldn't it be wrong not to use those skills to fight for peace?
With great power comes great responsibility. And what is the secret Reed Richards has been hiding for so long? The civilian lives of superheroes seem unaffected by having two identities. But all that changed when Stan Lee introduced the idea that one person with superpowers leading a double life might run into some problems once in a while. Problems we could all relate to.
When Marvel hit and when Stan, Jack, and Steve Ditko and all these people birthed the Marvel Universe, the seismic shift in the way people related to those characters versus the way they had related to the superheroes before, it was so huge because of, oh, I can relate to this.
DC's characters, for the most part, if you looked at them overall, they were either born to it as Superman or Wonder Woman, or they worked really hard to get there, as with Batman.
The Marvel characters, to me, and a lot of time my job has been to reinterpret them, almost like you reinterpret a Shakespeare play. You just adapt them for a more modern thing. They seem more easily adaptable because their truths are more human.
I wanted Peter Parker to be every kid, every man, every guy. So every guy has girl problems. I don't care who the guy is. Every guy has money problems. Every guy, in some way or other, is insecure.
Peter Parker didn't say, I'm going to be a superhero when I grow up and I'm going to work at it, as Bruce Wayne did. He just gets bitten by a radioactive spider and he wakes up one morning with all these weird powers messing up his life. That was something that, especially as teenagers, I was like 13 when I started reading. You know, you're sitting there and your voice is changing and you're getting zits and you don't know what to do about girls. And here are these characters who are in very much the same place, as opposed to Superman, who's your dad. That was very, very, very appealing. And I think probably the smartest thing Stan and Jack and Steve did was to make most of the characters teenagers.
Sometimes a hero is changed to save the character. But once in a while, a character is changed to help save the company that publishes that character.
I got hired around 1999, and things were about as bad as they were over there. I didn't know it at the time. I was just thrilled to be there. They had hired me and a few of my peers. They said, hey, we have this idea to take the idea of Spider-Man and X-Men and do like a ground zero, day one relaunch, you know, not reinventing it, not like, but let's tell the stories if it happened today, not in the 60s. And any change we make will be cosmetically about this society. The Marvel Universe was birthed out of the Cold War, and all of those origins are birthed out of nuclear paranoia. It's all radiation, gamma bombs, mutations from, bombs hitting. It's all, the Russians are going to drop bombs on us and we're all going to be mutated into Hulks and X-Men's, and we're going to go in outer space and radiation's going to hit us, every single one of them. So I'm like, okay, well that was of that time. Genetic paranoia is what we have today versus the Cold War, the nuclear paranoia. So we just altered it all, and it's a subtle alteration. So that we took those lessons, the Stan lessons, and applied them to modern comic book fiction, and it worked out pretty good.
Keith Giffen and J.M. DeMatteis revamped the Justice League in the 1990s. Although the book took heroes as powerful as Captain Atom and serious and brooding as Batman, it was a comedy. The cover of JLA #1 started a joke that set a model for dozens of covers to follow and showed some of DC's most famous faces in a ridiculous light. Heroes have to change over time. If not, they'll lose touch with their audience. Take the Fantastic Four. They started out as a simple family of superpowered adventurers. Digging deeper reveals a hell of a lot more.
I wanted a team of real people. So I thought it would be fun if the girl is not just somebody who in every story has to be rescued, but if she was actually a member of the team. Then, of course, we seem to need the obligatory teenager. Then, instead of getting another good-looking guy who kids around, I thought, I'll get a monster. This guy is really, he's ugly as sin. And instead of him acting like a monster, like the Hulk, let's say, I'm gonna get a lot of humor out of him, because I'll have him always insulting the leader of the group, Mr. Fantastic, as he modestly called himself. And so the Thing came along. So again, I really thought of their personal situation before I even thought of what I would do with the story.
As I was interpreting the Fantastic Four, the thing that I really kept in mind was the core of them is Reed Richards. He doesn't get the most play. He's basically considered the dullest of the Fantastic Four. But to me, that's the heart of the team. Here's a guy who, from his perspective, he took his friends up in a rocket ship with unsafe shielding, crossing his fingers and hoping it would work out, and instead disaster struck, and have destroyed them and made them things that freaks that the government would gladly scoop up and put in cells and study for the rest of their lives. There's only one thing you can do there, is that you can help them quickly turn those lives of tragedy into a life of celebrity by making them bigger than life figures, by giving them a headquarters in the middle of downtown, and they've got colorful costumes, and they call themselves things like Mr. Fantastic and the Human Torch, and they've got their own merchandising and action figures, and they've got big signals across the sky whenever they're needed. They want everybody to know they're coming. And that was Reed's way of turning that tragedy into a little something, give them a new life to replace the one that he took away from them. And that is his secret guilt, and I don't know whether any of the other team members know that Reed feels this way, but we do, and I think that was an important insight in Reed.
A comic that had constantly changing and evolving superheroes was Dial H for Hero. Published by DC in the 1960s, the series revolved around a mysterious dial that caused anyone who dialed the letters H-E-R-O to transform into a brand new superhero with unique powers and costume. He's been known to take comic book heroes and reinvent them for the modern age. From Animal Man to Superman, he's changed the way we look at comics. Spiderman, Superman, Batman. The heroes you grew up with may not be quite the way you remember them. Here's some essential reading on comic book heroes and their evolution. This is Comics 101. Ultimate Spider-Man is writer Brian Michael Bendis' modern reimagining of the classic Spider-Man story. Peter Parker is again an awkward teenager and no longer a product of the atomic age. The offending arachnid is now genetically modified, not radioactive. Kingdom Come is Mark Waid and Alex Ross's love song to the heroes of their youth. In this imaginary story of a future gone awry, Superman has turned his back on a world that he thinks no longer wants him. Cities are overrun with a new, violent generation of heroes with great powers, but no sense of responsibility. Miracle Man was originally conceived in 1954 by writer Mick Anglo as a British substitute for Captain Marvel. In 1982, writer Alan Moore revived Miracle Man from obscurity and with his unique vision created a sometimes disturbing picture of the corrupting influence of absolute power. His reinvention of the minor DC character Animal Man put Grant Morrison in the spotlight. Since then, Morrison has been called upon to revamp some of the biggest titles for both Marvel and DC and has become one of the biggest names in comics.
Grant Morrison is one of the most interesting writers working in mainstream comics right now. He's interested in reinventing things. He's interested in kind of taking the accumulated bizarre ideas of 70 years of superhero comics and turning over the rocks and seeing what's under there and having fun with all the bizarre conceptual stuff.
Well, obviously, when you're working with other people's characters, which I do at DC or Marvel, then you're really dealing with companies who have a portfolio of intellectual properties. In the case of Animal Man, it was this was way back when DC asked a bunch of us to come down and meet them after Alan Moore had been successful at doing Swamp Thing. And on the train down to London, I thought, oh, what I like. I went through some old obscure superheroes, and I remember Animal Man. I used to really like Animal Man because none of my friends knew who Animal Man was when I was a kid. And by the time I got down to London, a 7-hour journey on the train, I plotted out the first 4 issues of Animal Man and what I'd want to do with it.
Grant, in any one given afternoon, will have more good ideas for stories and characters than the rest of us will have in a year.
Well, in terms of something like, say, the Justice League that they brought me in, Justice League wasn't particularly successful at the time, but that was an easy one because it wasn't successful because it was filled with characters no one had ever heard of. What I just went back to was the basic concept of Justice League. These are the gods of the DC Universe. These are the big 7. And if any book called the Justice League that doesn't have them in it will probably not be as successful. And they kind of let me do it, and of course it worked. Sales went up by 100,000 on the first issue. The X-Men was slightly different because the X-Men were massively successful at the time. You know, the X-Men had been through their 20 years of the biggest success at Marvel, probably. But again, it was kind of running on fumes. Everyone was doing stories that were a bit like stories they'd done before. And the way I thought about doing that was after the movie. It was just because I loved the X-Men movie because it took a science fiction approach rather than a superhero approach to it. So that was the take for me, was let's do it as a science fiction story.
He's a thinker. He understands that imagination is the spark that drives everything in this industry, not the business end of it, and not the beach towels and the movie tie-ins and all that stuff, but just the sheer joy of imagination.
If they are going to remain current, they have to reflect the times. The biggest and best have managed to remain fresh even though they've been around for decades. A hero is not something fixed in time. They're more than a person or era. A hero is an idea, and with new ideas come new heroes.